Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has taken credit for the legislation that was put into the National Defense Authorization Act of 2027. He basically said, yeah, this is what I want. Well, he wants it because he'll have the ability to direct the U.S. military. I mean, it's mind-boggling when you think about it. And this particular proposal, by the way it's structured, and you know, when I first heard about it, I said, I have to read the legislation, because let me tell you, folks who are watching, you have to read the legislation in order to understand its workings. And the way this is written, it puts the Department of Defense in the driver's seat over other federal departments, including state. And then this policy it runs through the whole government. I mean, this really, you could almost say this is a takeover. And you know, for some it'll sound hysterical, but the truth is that it is laying the groundwork for an entanglement that has never happened in the history of the United States. This is totally unprecedented.
This provision would greatly expand coordination to seemingly every area of defense tech, including AI, quantum, autonomous systems, directed energy, cyber, biotech, and many more. It also proposes network integration and data fusion. In other words, the report suggests that U.S. military's data could soon be the Israeli military's data. If fully enacted, this proposal will likely provide a higher level of military-industrial integration than U.S. has with any other country in the world. However, critics warn that the proposal could give Israel greater influence in the United States politics and make it easier for Israeli interests to shape American foreign policy decisions in West Asia. They argue that the plan would mark a major shift in U.S.-Israel defense ties, moving beyond the long-standing model of military to a much deeper level of cooperation between the two countries' defense sectors. Now, this new development comes at a time when Israel and U.S. military ties have already reached its highest point due to the Iran war and the West Asia conflict.
On this vote, the yeas are 216, the nays are 212. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Yeah, I mean, that largely the Department of War manages that legislative portfolio, so I'm aware of the provision you're discussing that involves cooperation on technology. And look, at the end of the day, the truth is we do that with countries all over the world, right? I mean, if somebody, well, I haven't read the specific provision in terms to tell you in detail. I understand that. I understand the topic, though, because it's not new. You know, on air defense, for example, we've long cooperated with the Israelis. Look, if we have a breakthrough in our system or they have a breakthrough in theirs, we could share that in a way to improve our own systems as well. So if they've come up with some novel way of defeating drones, for example, of course we would want to have that and benefit from it. By the way, they're not the only country in the world that we would do that with. We do that with other countries as well. So I think that's the provision you're referring to, and that's something we're already doing. I mean, that's something that already exists. But I don't think there's any, that's different from sovereignty. I mean, it's not like U.S. forces are going to come under the command and control of a foreign general or anything of that nature.
When Ukraine was asking for Iron Dome, the United States and some lawmakers, including Lindsey Graham, wanted the U.S. to send Iron Dome battery that was in the East Coast. Netanyahu vetoed that. That was the co-production.
Yeah, but anytime you enter into co-production, we have those restrictions too. I mean, if we provide weaponry to a country as part of an agreement, they can't transfer that to a third country without our approval. We do the same thing. And Israel's not the only country in the world that does it. Other countries do it with their systems as well. That's just a normal way. When you do arms sales, part of the restrictions is you get to veto them passing it on to a third country. That's not just us to do it or Israel, it's every country.
We turn now to look at how artificial intelligence is reshaping how wars are fought. The Trump administration says the U.S. has struck 11,000 targets in Iran since the war began. The military's largely relied on an AI system known as Project Maven to speed up the process of identifying targets. But critics have questioned the accuracy of the AI system. The Pentagon's now investigating if Project Maven played a role in the U.S. strike on the Iranian girls' school that killed over 170 people, mainly children. The Pentagon launched Project Maven in 2017. Google was an initial partner, but the company pulled out after over 3,000 Google workers signed a letter opposing the work, saying, quote, "We believe that Google should not be in the business of war." The big data firm Palantir then took over the project and has run it ever since. This is Palantir's chief technology officer, Shyam Sankar, speaking on Bloomberg earlier this month.
Current operations are ongoing, but I think people will reflect back and say this is the first large-scale combat operation that was really driven, enhanced, made substantially more productive with technology, with AI. If you think about Gulf War or Gulf War II, sorry. Gulf War II, we did about 1,000 targets. It was 6 months of planning for roughly 50 to 100 people. And in this conflict, you're looking at that equivalent of work for twice as many targets was done by one person in 2 weeks. So how do we give our service members that Iron Man suit? We're making them 50 times more productive than the adversary.
Iron Man suit.
Yeah, a conceptual Iron Man suit, right? Like, how do I make them superhuman?
The people who backed Project Maven believed that AI could be a route towards autonomy and to help the US speed up the scale and speed of warfare. And also for its backers, they hoped that AI could deliver accuracy, protect civilians, and protect US troops and allied troops. Of course, there was a huge backlash from campaigners who thought it would do the opposite, that AI could harm civilians, that there could be atrocities in such a future era of warfare.
Many Americans out national parks visiting. It's the last hurrah of summer. And quietly, buried inside this enormous bill is Section 219, which, well, I'll give you the floor on what is about to happen in Washington.
Well, first of all, the NDAA stands for the National Defense Authorization Act, and it's one of the few bills that passes every year. I've been here 14 years. There have been 14 NDAAs. So you can set your clock on the fact that this bill will pass. So anything that gets in it is dangerous as a cocked gun. It's going to become law. Well, this bill is hundreds of pages long. And in one of those hundreds of pages, it's actually 5 pages long, is Section 219. And it was Section 224, but it's now Section 219. And it calls for the integration of our military technology and the supply chains that produce our high-tech military equipment to be integrated with Israel's. Now, we don't have this bilateral agreement with any other country in the world. And I would argue that we shouldn't, in order to protect our sovereignty and to protect our national secrets. If you wanted to share one thing at a time, let's say we wanted to collaborate on missile defense systems, I think that's fine. The president can do that just by virtue of controlling the military. But what they're doing here is legislatively, they are appointing a person. I joke that this person will eventually be a cabinet member, but right now it's a lower level position, who will be in charge of the integration. And that means that this project will have a lifespan that outlasts the commander-in-chief. Regardless of who the next president is, this provision lasts forever. And it's in the National Defense Authorization Act. It's coming to a vote. A lot of people saw this. I saw this back in June and offered an amendment. By the way, there are 1,400 amendments that have been offered to the National Defense Authorization Act here in the House. My amendment was amendment number 2. I was the second person to offer an amendment to the NDAA, and that's because I saw this troubling provision in there. Now, what they've decided to do is they've decided to block my amendment. So there will be no vote and no debate on Section 219 and whether it should be in the NDAA or whether it should not be in the NDAA.